This week we'll be starting off another round with Inbetween Dragons. I'll be giving this a read through and then giving my thoughts on it, and then kind of breaking it down for inspirations in it. See you on the other side. Say, based on my read through of this is probably one of the best examples of exactly why I do this. The book doesn't work as a story for me, but it's brimming with inspiration. If I had to give the book a rating, I would give it a rating of about 3.2 out of a 6.9 for a story. But for the ideas, I'd give it a 5.8 out of a 6.9. The premise of the story is that you have a main character who has access to a magic library in which all the books serve as portals to other worlds. And he has adventures in these other worlds, and somewhere along the way in the story, something happens that causes these worlds to start to bleed into each other, and then ultimately into the library and further out into the real world. And that's a really great story idea. The first thing I'm going to take from this story that I think would be good is this story from there should be something like save the world from the library, save the library from the stories, and save the stories from each other. If you wrote that story, it would be a great story, and it would also be completely different than what this book is. And number two, coming into this book, was something that was just said kind of offhand early on in the book, was that there were no girls in the library unless you counted the princesses in some of the stories, which doesn't count. The way it just says that seems to suggest a potential storyline in which you take the same universe, the same premise, and have a young woman get into the library, and it opens the opportunity for a young woman to take the role of the lead in something like Treasure Island. Fan fiction it up in a way, take a look at classics if they had been written as the main character being female. But I think there's another potential to go a little bit further in some of that exploration with a second idea this gives me, which is, again, you find a young woman gets into the library, or a group of young women, a young woman's readers group in a magic library, and they find themselves put into not only the role but the bodies of male lead characters. So that's the second idea that I came up with from just something that was mentioned in here, something that came up. The third idea, number three, was the first place you see the main character in this is he's participating in one of the novels in the library. He's a knight in a modern city driving a used car steed with ceramic metal armor, and they're confronting dragons that disguise themselves as humans in a cartoonishly devious and subterfuge-ridden way of trying to pollute and poison the humans of the city. It makes me think that there's a way to do a story in which you have dragons actually being humans within the city in a way similar to you have vampires in a lot of vampire fiction, where they look like humans and they act like humans to a certain degree, but they're not quite human. But as far as they're concerned, they're the people that matter. So taking vampire fiction and writing it as dragon fiction, perhaps, but also using it as a means of looking at culture clash and giving it a different flavor than just vampire fiction that you oftentimes see. Was Psychic Detective. The story is the main character hops into a novel about a psychic detective who's protecting people from, a psychic alien from Dimension X or some such thing that takes over people's minds. And one of the things that they talk about in that story is if somebody's been taken over and their mind has been changed into something else, there's no getting that person back. It's sort of you can't step into the same river twice. Another person could inhabit that body, it just wouldn't be the same person. They'd think they were, they have the same memories, everything. So it's a question of the continuity of consciousness. And it's handled in like one or two sentences, and then it's just kind of glazed over. But the idea of this makes me think of, what if the psychic detective at some point was a victim of mind dominance, and when they were freed from it, it wasn't the psychic detective anymore. It was some other spirit that filled that body and knows that it's not the same person. You can't get the person back, but you can give another spirit an opportunity to live and experience this world. And whether that's, a kind of a beachhead on a sort of a spiritual realm invasion, that could be an interesting story. Basically, the story element is the main character is a teenage boy in a library that turns any book brought into it into a reality. So of course, no surprise, that he's curious and wants to see if he can find naughty books. He fails to find any naughty books in the library. But the way they ruin it in this one is, he finds a loophole that allows him to find a naughty book within a chapter, roughly, of getting the impulse to do it. And the threat to the rest of the library comes along. And I think it would be better used as an idea of a real honest to God, not like a chapter long gimmick, but a whole quest for a naughty book. It would be hilarious. Maybe a cartoon character from your favorite cartoon series when you were a kid is living in Toontown, and they've just become aware of the idea that there are things like naughty books, but there's nothing like that in Toontown. They're cartoons. There's nothing like that. So they have to be able to quest for a naughty book or something like that. Or the other idea that I came up with that's not about necessarily a fictional setting where you're looking to open a book that would be a portal, but more along the lines of a science fiction where you have a whole world that is essentially an amusement park with robotic entities that inhabit this realm. But you can reprogram them with books or e-books that you can upload into their mental files. You just got to go hunt out what you want to put into that robot. Hopefully, at least in this idea, if not this book, the character grows during the course of the story, which doesn't happen really here. Is really just taking the whole premise of this and rethinking the idea of what the library means. I mean, in the other ideas that came to me is just take for a concept that the library is real. Is it the library that's magical and makes the books portals? And so being able to have something like a warehouse used to collect these books that out in the real world become too powerful and gateways to alternate dimensions, capture these books, put them in the warehouse, and that's something you can do. The other idea is it the library itself that turns any book brought into it into a adventure that you can go work in, like a holodeck almost. So it becomes a sort of a episodic series of short stories you could do that are based on sort of like fan fiction, Gulliver's Travels kind of ideas of, you go check out a galaxy far, far away, but it's going to be different enough that it's not what you think it is, and it's the main character's adventure through it, so they might do things differently. They might warn their aunt and uncle before something happens. And then the third idea that comes about it is artists and writers to build their own heaven. Make your masterwork and make it your home that you'll live in, the adventures you'll live in once you can no longer live in this realm. Build a heaven, kind of. And the final one I thought would be kind of fun to do is using the library as a sort of cryostasis or suspended animation for heroes, artifacts, monsters, and mythical beings like unicorns. They used to exist in the world, and we don't see them anymore because we stored them all in these books that we now keep in the library. And when the time comes that the world needs King Arthur, you just go into the Avalon section of the Mystic Library, open the book, and call him forth from the book. If you need Excalibur or Nikola Tesla's death rays to fight off an alien invasion, you go into that section of the library, you get the book, and you pull them out, and you go on the quest in the book, and you get the things you need from the book. That would be a really fun way to do that. And then, that's a lot of the stuff that I've pulled out of this. There are other stories that are used that the character traipses through and is part of this book. There's a time-traveling professor who keeps the continuity of the universe together by watching certain key points in history and using a time machine to go back and make sure they're preserved. There's a rescue attempt on an African princess from a Japanese robot witch doctor. There's a science fiction setting that's sort of set up early on that's a colony world that he's in charge of, and a mystery happens that's essentially a whole world used as a locked room mystery, and they never explain it. He fails to solve it. It doesn't go anywhere, and you never find out what the point of the story was. It's literally like when the author was writing this, he said, if you did a science fiction story as a locked room mystery where it's the whole planet they're on is the locked room, and then he doesn't develop the idea anymore. He sets that up, uses it as a proposal in here, and then doesn't have to finish it or come up with a solution or anything like that. It's got a lot of great ideas to work with, and I don't think it handled any of them well enough for me to like it. But the fact that it has so many of those interesting ideas to develop and play with and use as inspiration for other ideas, the author has 3 other books. And from the reviews I've seen of other people talking about them, I don't expect the books to be an easier or better read than this one. But I do kind of think there's going to be a good source of inspiration from other things in it. So really, when I say it's ideal for using this book in inspired content, it's because I look at those other books and I kind of wish somebody would do this for those other books. That's why I do this. And so, next source of material to do that with is going to be Mazes and Monsters. So I haven't seen it yet. I'll hope you join me while I do that next time. And see you then.